The Marigolds at first glance just seems like a really depressing story about the Great Depression, which is easy to get depressed about. However, the Marigolds, when read with a closer eye and looking for deeper meaning, is actually an incredibly heartbreaking story about the coming of age and what happens as we change and mature and the understanding we gain when we get a little bit older. I want to start out, we're going to just go through the story bit by bit. And I like starting here where the speaker says, "When I think of the hometown of my youth, all that I seem to remember is dust. The brown, crumbly dust of late summer. Arid, sterile dust that gets into the eyes and makes them water, gets into the throat and between the toes of bare brown feet." Instantly, this story starts off with a very somber tone, and this mood is established where we can understand this is not going to be a light story. Words like arid and sterile, things that make your eyes water, that get into your throat. It gives us this idea of being uncomfortable, being hot and dry, and thirsty, and just unhappy. And so I think she starts off this story really, really powerfully. I also like that the speaker starts to question her memory from the get-go. She says, "I don't know why I should remember only the dust. Surely there must have been lush green lawns and paved streets under leafy shade trees somewhere in town. But memory is an abstract painting. It does not present things as they are, but rather as they feel." And so the speaker here is giving us a hint already that this story won't be just about things as they are, but things that you feel from events that happen in your life. She goes on to say, "And one other thing I remember, another incongruency of memory, a brilliant splash of sunny yellow against the dust, Miss Lottie's marigolds." This is a great example of foreshadowing in the story, and the speaker is telling us that these marigolds are the one bright, sunshiny yellow spot in this background memory of dirt and dull color. Kind of makes me think of The Wizard of Oz, where the movie starts out in sepia or black and white tones, and then once she gets to Oz, everything is bright and in color. Whenever the memory of those marigolds flashes across my mind, a strange nostalgia comes with it, and remains long after the picture has faded. I feel again the chaotic emotions of adolescence, elusive as smoke, yet as real as the potted geranium before me now. Joy and rage and wild animal gladness and shame become tangled together in the multicolored scheme of 14 going on 15, as I recall that devastating moment when I suddenly, more woman than child, years ago in Miss Lottie's yard. I think of those marigolds at the strangest times. I remember them vividly now as I desperately pass away the time. So we get into a little more depth about what these marigolds mean to our speaker, and clearly they are loaded with meaning, as we can see from this paragraph. They make our speaker nostalgic for childhood, these chaotic emotions of adolescence, yet rage and joy, gladness and shame all tangled together. So we can understand that there are a lot of complex emotions around these marigolds, and the speaker is going to go on and tell us what's the deal with the marigolds. She also goes on to note that they were waiting. This theme comes up a lot in this story, this reoccurring motif of waiting. But they don't know what they're waiting for. They're not waiting for prosperity. They're not waiting for hard work and thrift to pay off. Maybe they were waiting for a miracle. But and she ends this paragraph with saying, "But we just waited and waited because there was nothing else to do during the Depression for her." She goes on to talk about her memory. "For the most part, those days are ill-defined in my memory, running together and combining like a fresh watercolor painting left out in the rain. One day returns to me with special clarity for some reason, perhaps because it was the beginning of the experience that in some inexplicable way marked the end of innocence." So again, we know that the speaker is building towards this event where she can clearly say, that day, I was no longer a child. So we know we're going to be looking for something big and powerful and meaningful. And again, we have the author speaking of their memory and saying, look, most of this stuff is all kind of vague, but there's one that really, really sticks out to me. She goes on to talk about how they're going to go annoy Miss Lottie because that's fun. She notes, I was still child enough to scamper along. So again, we have this dichotomy arising out of the situation where the speaker acknowledges she was a child, but coming into adulthood. The description of Miss Lottie's house is very important. It was one of the most ramshackle of all our ramshackle homes. The boards themselves seemed to remain upright, not from being nailed together, but rather from leaning together. A brisk wind might have blown it down, and the fact that it was still standing implied a kind of enchantment that was stronger than the elements. A gray, rotting thing with no porch, no shutters, no steps, set on a cramped lot with no grass, not even any weeds. A monument to decay. This is such a powerful visual that the speaker is giving us. Literally just a gray, ramshackle mess, which fits into what the speaker has been telling us about the background and the setting anyways, that it's gray, it's dull, it's falling apart, it's a miracle the wind hasn't knocked it over already. And then we get to the one anomaly for the speaker of her childhood. The marigolds were perhaps the strangest part of the picture. They did not fit in with the crumbling decay of the rest of her yard. They rose suddenly and shockingly, a dazzling strip of bright blossoms, clumped together in enormous mounds, warm and passionate and sun-golden. Miss Lottie worked on them all summer, every summer, down on her creaky knees, weeding and cultivating and arranging, while the house crumbled. We children hated those marigolds. They interfered with the perfect ugliness of the place. They were too beautiful. They said too much that we could not understand. They did not make sense. There was something in the vigor with which the old woman destroyed the weeds that intimidated us. I think it was the flowers we wanted to destroy, but nobody had the nerve to try it. So here the speaker is finally alluding to what's going on with these marigolds. We have this horrible ramshackle house, this old woman who's got creaky knees, and this is all she cares about, is cultivating these beautiful marigolds. And she starts hinting here that these marigolds said too much that we could not understand. They didn't make sense. So the children know that they hate the marigolds, but they can't understand what it is about those marigolds that really is upsetting to them. And she acknowledges, we wanted to destroy them. Nobody had the nerve to try it, and nobody really understood why they felt the urge to destroy these marigolds. After this event with Miss Lottie happens, she says, I did not join the merriment when the kids gathered again under the oak in our bare yard. Suddenly, I was ashamed, and I did not like being ashamed. The child in me sulked and said it was all in fun, but the woman in me flinched at the thought of the malicious attack that I had led. So again, we have this dichotomy of leaving childhood and coming into adulthood, coming into being responsible and respectful and understanding and sympathetic of other people's feelings. And she's grappling with that. What does it mean to be innocent and have fun as a child versus what does it mean to take responsibility for our actions? A little bit later that evening, after some more events have happened, Elizabeth kind of gets caught up in some big emotions. She says, I was running as if the Furies were after me. The Furies referencing the Greek Furies who would make you crazy. As perhaps they were, running silently and furiously until I came to where I had half known I was headed, to Miss Lottie's yard. I leaped furiously into the mounds of marigolds and pulled madly, trampling and pulling and destroying the perfect yellow blooms. The fresh smell of early morning and of dew-soaked marigolds spurred me on as I went tearing and mangling and sobbing, while Joey tugged my dress or my waist, crying, Elizabeth, stop! Please, stop! So for us, this is the big climatic moment. Elizabeth has finally lost it, and she is destroying this garden. And she looks up to see Miss Lottie's face. She says, there was no rage in the face now that the garden was destroyed, and there was nothing any longer to be protected. I scrambled to my feet, and stood there and stared at her, and that was the moment when childhood faded, and womanhood began. That violent, crazy act was the last act of childhood. For as I gazed at the immobile face with the sad, weary eyes, I gazed upon a kind of reality which is hidden to childhood. The witch was no longer a witch, but only a broken old woman who had dared to create beauty in the midst of ugliness and sterility. She had been born in squalor and lived in it all her life. Now, at the end of that life, she had nothing except a falling down hut, a wrecked body, and John Burke, the mindless son of her passion. Whatever verve there was left in her, whatever was of love and beauty and joy that had not been squeezed out by life, had been there in the marigolds she had so tenderly cared for. And in this moment, as Elizabeth acknowledges her shift into adulthood, she comes to understand this deeper meaning that she's been referencing throughout this whole short story, where she says, I finally was able to understand that it wasn't just the marigolds. This was this woman's life. This was symbolic of everything she wanted and had hoped for, and in an act of rage, that was destroyed. So we had Elizabeth really coming to understand what it means to be an adult, and what it means to take responsibility and to understand the repercussions of our actions. And she summarizes it here beautifully, saying, innocence involves an unseeing acceptance of things at face value, an ignorance of the area below the surface. In that humiliating moment, I looked beyond myself and into the depths of another person. This was the beginning of compassion, and one cannot have both compassion and innocence. I love this paragraph here because it's very reminiscent of what it means to read a story. Yes, you can read something at face value and accept it and say it's great, but that means you're ignorant of the area below the surface. And getting into that surface and understanding the deeper meanings of what you're reading is when power comes into literature. And it does take time to get there. But again, one cannot have both compassion and innocence. She removes herself from the story because she is looking back on this story as an adult. She says, the years have taken me worlds away from that time and that place, from the dust and squalor of our lives, and from the bright thing that I destroyed in a blind, childish striking out, God knows what. Miss Lottie died long ago, and many years have passed since I last saw her hut, completely barren at last, for despite my wild contrition, she never planted marigolds again. Yet there are times when the image of those passionate yellow mounds return with painful poignancy. For one does not have to be ignorant and poor to find that his life is as barren as the dusty yards of our town, and I too have planted marigolds.